I was their broken toy. They were 6 children I raised with my blood and sweat, and they turned me into their broken toy. "Choose the best one, Mom," they shouted after each torture session. For years, I was the judge of my own hell, until I discovered that the true judge was yet to come. Good morning, my darlings. What a blessing to be here with you all again. I'm Eleanor Wilson. I'm 82 years old, and I live in this blessed little town of Millbrook, here in rural Pennsylvania. I was born far from here, in a small place called Middleton, Wisconsin, where the wind is cold and people speak with a slight Scandinavian accent. But life takes its turns, doesn't it? These days, my greatest pleasure is teaching sewing classes to the women in my neighborhood. I have a small room in the back of my house that I've turned into a little classroom. I teach them everything from basic stitches to more elaborate work. You know, sewing saved me during many moments in my life. When everything seemed to be falling apart around me, it was in scraps and threads that I found a little peace. The needle and thread always gave me the power to mend not just fabrics, but also pieces of my soul. I started sewing out of necessity, needing to make clothes for my children when they were small. But over time, it became my refuge, my moment of conversation with God. Each stitch was like a small prayer. And today, teaching other women to sew is my way of showing that even from the most tattered situations in life, we can create something beautiful and useful. My students Margaret and Sally always arrive early for coffee and good conversation. We talk about everything: the TV shows, remedies for joint pain, grandchildren who grow up in the blink of an eye. I started recording these videos after my granddaughter Rebecca taught me how to use this cell phone. At first, I thought it was silly. Who would want to hear the stories of an old woman like me, I thought, but she insisted so much. "Grandma, your stories are important. They need to be preserved." And look, it's been almost a year since I've been here, sharing pieces of my life with you. And you, my dear ones who are watching me now, tell me here in the comments. From which little town are you watching me? And at what time of day did you find this video from Grandma Eleanor? Are you having morning coffee, resting after lunch, or already in bed before sleeping? I always read all the comments, and I'm so happy to know where you're from and when you take a moment to listen to this old lady here. Tell me, okay? Let's create a chain of affection. Today I'm going to tell you a story that I've kept in my heart for many years. A difficult story, but one that needs to be told because it might help someone who is going through something similar. Because, my dears, even in the darkest situations in life, there's always a light at the end of the tunnel. And sometimes that light comes from where we least expect it. I'm going to tell you about a time when I lived a nightmare in my own home, at the hands of those who should have been my greatest protection. A time when I learned that blood ties don't always mean love and respect. But I also learned that the strength God places within us is greater than any suffering. My story begins back in the 1960s, on an isolated farm in Middleton, when I was a young mother of 6 sons and had just buried the love of my life, my William. Oh, if only I had known what awaited me in those days of mourning. I was born in 1943 in small-town Middleton, a community of Scandinavian immigrants in Wisconsin. My father, Harold, worked in carpentry, making everything from furniture to wagons. My mother, Gertrude, took care of the house and still managed to make the best apple pies and jams in the region. We were 6 sisters, and I was the middle one. Our house was simple, made of wood, with a wood stove that was never extinguished and kept everything warm during the harsh winters of that region. I grew up among sewing machines and fabric scraps. My mother sewed for others, and from a young age, I would sit on a little stool watching her transform pieces of fabric into beautiful clothes. By 7, I had learned the first stitches. By 10, I was making clothes for my cloth dolls. It was my mother who taught me that in life, just like in sewing, each stitch has its time and purpose. In our community, almost everyone spoke with that Scandinavian accent. At school, Miss Hildegard tried to teach us proper English, but it was hard to let go of our way of speaking at home. "Hey kiddo, come here," Or, "You're bothering me, you know," were expressions we mixed with Swedish or Norwegian words. During recess, we girls played Ring Around the Rosie and with dolls. My best friend was Brunhilde, the baker's daughter. We would meet after school and talk under a large oak tree near the Lutheran church. At home, I helped my mother with household chores. I learned to cook, clean, wash clothes in the tub, and to sew, of course. My father was a strict man, one of those who thought children had to learn the value of work early on. Still, he had a good heart. On winter nights, when the wind howled outside, he would gather the whole family around the stove and tell stories about his ancestors in Sweden. On Sundays, we went to church very early, women on one side, men on the other. Afterwards, it was family lunch day. The table was abundant: sauerkraut, sausage, pork knuckle, potato salads. The food was as abundant as the Scandinavian accent in the conversations. After lunch, while the men played cards, we women stayed in the kitchen, drinking coffee and discussing community news. It was on one of those Sunday afternoons that I met William. He had come from a neighboring town to work at Mr. Schmidt's sawmill. He was a tall young man with dark hair and green eyes who stood out among the blondes in our community. When our eyes first met, I felt butterflies in my stomach that weren't from fear, but from something that I, at 16, didn't know well yet. It was love. The courtship was as the custom of the time demanded. William asked my father's permission, who imposed strict conditions. We could only meet on Sundays, after church, and always with someone from the family supervising. But not even that diminished the joy I felt seeing him arrive, all dressed up, with a little wildflower in his hands. We married in 1960 in a simple ceremony at the community church. I was 17, he was 23. My dress was made by my mother and me, every stitch given with love and hope. We went to live on a small farm that belonged to his parents, about 6 miles from downtown Middleton. The place was beautiful, with green fields and a small stream that cut through the property, but it was isolated. Our closest neighbors were almost a half-hour's walk away. In the first year of marriage, I became pregnant with my first son, Ernest. Then came George, Theodore, Conrad, Oliver, and Gerald, one after the other. William wanted a large family to help with farm work, and I, raised to be a wife and mother, accepted with a smile, even when my body ached and my head spun from exhaustion. William was a good man, hard-working, dedicated to his family. He wasn't one for many words or affection, but he never raised his hand to me or the boys. He was respected in the community as an honorable and God-fearing man. He taught his sons the value of hard work and keeping one's word. I felt protected by his side. Our life was simple, but it had its own rhythm that pleased me. Early in the morning, I prepared breakfast for everyone. William and the older boys went to the fields. I stayed with the little ones, taking care of the garden, the chickens, making bread, washing clothes. In the afternoon, everyone returned for lunch. Then, it was time to resume work until nightfall. At night, we gathered for dinner. William read a passage from the Bible before everyone retired. On weekends, we went to church and then visited relatives or received visitors. It was a hard life, but an honest one. I had my children, my husband, my home. What more could a woman want in those days? But as the saying goes, God writes straight with crooked lines, and my line was about to make a knot that would change everything. In the winter of 1962, William began complaining of chest pains. At first, we thought it was just fatigue. He had worked hard to increase our corn plantation. But the pains got worse. On a cold July night, he woke up breathless, clutching his chest. Ernest, who was already 10 years old, ran to the nearest neighbor for help. When the doctor arrived, 3 hours later, my William had already departed to the Lord's arms. I found myself alone, with 6 sons to raise, on an isolated farm, far from my family. The oldest at 10, the youngest at just 2. At that moment, I had no time to cry. I had mouths to feed, a house to maintain, a property to manage. I never imagined that the worst was yet to come. Grief didn't have time to fully settle in me. With 6 mouths to feed and a property to care for, my tears had to wait. The first months after William passed were pure work. I woke up before sunrise and only stopped when everyone was already asleep. My fingers were raw from so much washing, cooking, sewing, and working the land. Ernest, my firstborn, began to take on some of his father's responsibilities on the farm. At just 10 years old, he was already handling heavy tools and taking care of the animals. George, at 9, followed him like a shadow. The two became inseparable partners in work, but also in mischief. Theodore, at 7, had a quieter, more observant temperament. Conrad, at 6, was restless, always looking for something to do. Oliver, at 4, was still too young to help, but already wanted to imitate his older brothers. And Gerald, my little one at 2, was still clinging to my skirts all the time. I clearly remember the day I realized something was changing in our house. It was a Saturday afternoon, about 3 months after William's burial. I was at the wash basin, doing laundry, with Gerald playing nearby with some thread spools. Suddenly I heard a scream coming from the kitchen. I ran to see what it was and found Conrad on the floor, crying, with a cut on his forehead. Standing, Ernest held a wooden spoon. "What happened here?" I asked, while picking up Conrad to examine the wound. "He wouldn't obey me," Ernest replied, with a coldness I didn't recognize. Dad always said that those who don't obey have to learn the hard way. Those words chilled me. I had never heard William say such a thing. He was strict, yes, but he never hit the boys. I tried to explain this to Ernest, but he looked at me with an expression that mixed disdain and defiance. Dad's not here anymore. Now I'm the man of the house. That night I couldn't sleep well. Ernest's words echoed in my head. I am the man of the house. But he was just a 10-year-old boy, a boy who suddenly found himself forced to grow up too fast. In the following days, I noticed it wasn't just Ernest who was changing. George also began to show more authoritarian behavior with the younger brothers. The two competed over who gave the orders, who decided what each should do. At first, I thought it was just a phase, a way of dealing with the loss of their father. But I was wrong. A week later, I found Theodore hiding in the barn, crying silently. When I asked what had happened, he showed purple marks on his arms. It was Ernest and George, he confessed, between sobs. They said I wasn't working right. I confronted my older sons that same night. I explained that they had no right to hit their brothers, that this wasn't what their father would have wanted. They listened in silence, heads down. I thought I had resolved the situation. But the next morning when I went to feed the chickens, I heard Ernest talking to George. Mom thinks she's in charge of something, but she's just a woman. Dad always said that women don't understand anything about how to raise a man. Again, words that had never come from William's mouth. My husband always respected me as his wife and the mother of his children. He never questioned my decisions regarding the children. Where was Ernest getting these ideas? That's when I began to notice the influence of Uncle Harold, William's older brother. He lived in town, but since my husband's death, he had started visiting the farm frequently. Harold was a bitter man who never married. He had a barely disguised contempt for women and made no secret that he thought I wouldn't be able to raise 6 boys alone. These boys need a man to guide them, he would repeat whenever he came to visit. A lone woman will end up raising a bunch of sissies. During one of these visits, I caught Harold talking to Ernest and George behind the shed. He spoke softly, but I could hear some phrases. You are the men of the house now. You can't let your mother be in charge. Women only understand when you show them who's in command. I wanted to intervene, to tell him to stop poisoning my children. But something held me back. Harold was my only contact with William's family, the only help I had in dealing with some farm matters. If I confronted him, I would lose that support. And in those days, a widow with 6 children couldn't afford to dismiss help, even if that help came poisoned. My older son's behavior gradually worsened. They were no longer just aggressive with their brothers. They began to answer back to me, to question my orders, to look at me in a way that made me feel small and insignificant. When I called them out, they laughed and said that I didn't understand anything, that things were different now. One night, about 6 months after William's death, Ernest refused to help with the firewood for the stove. When I insisted, he threw the sticks on the ground and said angrily, "You do it! I'm not your employee!" That hurt me more than any slap. My son, my firstborn, treating me as if I were a stranger, an intruder in our house. That night, I cried silently under the covers so none of the boys would hear me. A mother can't show weakness, I thought. A mother has to be strong. But the situation was getting out of my control. Ernest and George no longer hid their contempt for me. And worse, they were teaching the other brothers to see me as a weak figure, someone who didn't deserve respect. Theodore, always so sensitive, was the only one who seemed troubled by it all. Many times I found him watching me with sad eyes, as if he wanted to say something, but didn't have the courage. One day, when I was in the yard hanging clothes, I heard a heated argument inside the house. I ran to see what it was, and found Ernest and George fighting. Not about something related to work or chores, but about something much more disturbing. "I'm the oldest. I'm the one who commands her," shouted Ernest, pushing his brother. "But I'm the one who looks most like Dad. She respects me more," George retorted. They were arguing over who had more authority over me, as if I were an object, a property to be divided. I froze at the door, not knowing how to react. That's when Theodore, who was watching the scene from a corner, said softly, "She's our mother, not our maid." The two immediately stopped and turned to their younger brother. I saw something in their eyes that deeply frightened me. Hatred. A hatred that shouldn't exist in the hearts of such young children. "Shut up, you weakling!" Ernest advanced toward Theodore, but I put myself between them. "Enough! You two outside. Go take care of the animals." To my surprise, they obeyed. But before leaving, Ernest said something that remained marked in my memory as the beginning of my true nightmare. "One day you will learn who really commands here." That night, I locked the door to my room for the first time. Not for fear of strangers, but for fear of my own sons, of what they were becoming, of the hatred that was growing inside them, a hatred that I didn't fully understand, but that I felt was directed at me. In the following weeks, I tried to regain control of the situation. I imposed stricter rules, distributed tasks, tried to be firmer. But for each order of mine, there was an ever-increasing resistance. And the worst? Ernest and George began to use the younger brothers as pawns in their power game. One afternoon, I found Conrad hiding under the table, trembling. When I got him to speak, he told me that Ernest had threatened to beat him if he helped me with any household chore. "He said that men don't do women's work," sobbed Conrad. "He said that if I help you, I'll become a little woman." That's when I understood. My older sons weren't just trying to establish authority. They were trying to isolate me, to weaken me. They wanted me to feel alone, helpless, and they were using fear to control the younger brothers. The real blow came on a Sunday night. We had gone to church in the morning, as usual. The pastor had given a sermon about respecting parents. I thought that might touch my sons' hearts. But when we returned home, Ernest gathered all the brothers in the living room and, in front of me, said, "The pastor talked about respecting father and mother. But our mother doesn't act like a mother. She doesn't know how to take care of us properly. She doesn't know how to run the farm. She is weak." I tried to interrupt, to say that wasn't true. But George stood beside his brother and continued, "Uncle Harold said that a woman without a husband gets lost, that her head doesn't work right, that she needs a man to put things in order." The little ones listened to all this in silence, confused. Even Theodore, who had always defended me, seemed undecided. That's when Ernest said the phrase that marked the beginning of the cruel game that would define the next years of our lives. "From today on, we're going to show her how to govern a house. Each day, one of us will give the orders, and at the end of the day, she will have to say which of us was the best. Which of us deserves to be the man of the house? I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My children, still children, planning to subject me to a power game, to daily humiliation. I wanted to scream, to say that was absurd. But the words got stuck in my throat when I saw their looks. They were no longer the looks of children. They were the looks of little men, full of an anger that I didn't fully understand. And so, on that Sunday night, the darkest period of my life began. A period in which my own children became my tormentors. A period in which each day I would be judged and humiliated. A period in which the only thing that would keep me alive would be the hope that, one day, I would find a way out of that hell. That Sunday night, after the boys went to sleep, I sat alone in the kitchen, staring at nothing. Ernest's words echoed in my head. She will have to say which of us was the best. A game. They had turned my life, my authority as a mother, into a cruel game. I couldn't understand how we had come to this point. How my children, whom I had carried in my womb, breastfed, cared for with all my love, could now look at me with such coldness, such contempt. The next morning, Ernest woke up before everyone else, as always. But there was something different. He wore William's Sunday shirt. The clothes were huge on him, the sleeves folded several times, but the symbolism was clear. He was putting himself in his father's place. "Today I'm in charge," he announced during breakfast. "Mom, you'll stay in the kitchen all day. I don't want to see you in the field or in the barn. A woman's place is inside the house." George, who would normally dispute the position, just smiled, as if he knew his day would also come. The little ones watched, confused, but without questioning. Only Theodore seemed disturbed, pushing his food around without eating, avoiding looking at me or Ernest. Throughout that day, Ernest gave orders. He decided who would do which work, when we would have meals, even what I should cook. At the end of the day, he gathered everyone in the living room. That's when I understood that the game was more elaborate and cruel than I had imagined. "Now, Mom, you're going to say how I did today, if I was better or worse than Dad." I felt a lump in my throat. How could he ask me to compare a 10-year-old boy with his deceased father? It was absurd, painful. But I saw in his eyes that a refusal would not be accepted. You tried hard, Ernest," I managed to say. "Your father would be proud of your effort." It wasn't what he wanted to hear. His face contorted in an expression of anger. "You didn't answer. Was I better or worse than Dad? You're a child, Ernest. You can't compare yourself to a grown man." It was the wrong thing to say. He advanced toward me with his fist raised. He stopped inches from my face. "Never call me a child again. I am the man of this house now. Tomorrow is George's turn. We'll see if he does better." So began the routine that would mark the next years of our lives. Each day, one of the older boys, Ernest, George, and soon after Theodore and even Conrad, assumed the role of man of the house. Gave orders, supervised the work of others, decided everything. And at the end of the day, I was forced to judge the performance. I soon realized that the goal wasn't really to know who was the best. It was to humiliate me, to make me feel that I no longer had authority, that I depended on them, that I was merely a spectator in my own home. The humiliations gradually increased. At first, they were just orders and disrespect, but soon they transformed into open insults, small physical violence, deprivations. One day, about a month after the beginning of that perverse game, George decided that I didn't deserve dinner. "You didn't work right today," he said, taking the plate from in front of me. "Lazy women don't eat in my house." I spent the night hungry, hearing my stomach growl, while silent tears wet my pillow. It wasn't the physical hunger that hurt the most. It was the hunger for respect, for love, for dignity. On another occasion, Ernest decided that I should sleep in the barn. "The big bed was Dad's. You don't deserve to sleep in it." I spent 3 consecutive nights sleeping in the hay, among the animals, shivering from cold. When they finally allowed me back inside the house, I discovered they had thrown away William's clothes that I had kept so dearly. "So you don't cry for him like a fool," explained George. Each week brought a new humiliation, a new suffering. The boys competed among themselves to see who could be crueler, who could make me cry, who could extract more work from me. "Today you're going to wash all the clothes of the week and still weed the entire yard. You have to make lunch, but you can't use the stove. Figure it out with the fire outside. You're going to be punished in the back room until I say you can come out." And at the end of each day, the same cruel question. Who was better? Who deserves to be the man of the house? It didn't matter what I answered. If I praised one, the others would get angry and punish me later. If I criticized, the criticized one would take revenge. It was a game where I could only lose. Meanwhile, the younger ones, Oliver and Gerald, grew up seeing that behavior as normal. Oliver, especially, began to imitate his older brothers, treating me with contempt despite his mere 4, then 5 years. Gerald, being smaller, still sought my lap, my affection, but I saw in his little eyes the confusion, the fear. And I knew it was just a matter of time until he too learned to despise me. Theodore was the only one who seemed to have some compassion. On the days he commanded, the orders were milder. Sometimes, when no one was looking, he would bring me a piece of bread, a glass of milk, a kind word. But even he had to keep up appearances. If the brothers perceived his kindness, he would be the next target. The worst of all was the isolation. Our farm was already remote by nature, but the boys made sure that I became even more isolated. They wouldn't let me go to town, except for church on Sundays, and even then, always accompanied by at least 2 of them. I couldn't talk to anyone alone. If a neighbor appeared, they would stay nearby, monitoring my every word. Once, Pastor Eberhardt's wife came to visit. She was a kind lady who had noticed my sadness at church. While we talked in the living room, Ernest and George stayed nearby the whole time, controlling what I said. When she asked if everything was all right, if I needed help with the boys, Ernest answered for me. "Everything is great, Mrs. Eberhardt. Mom sometimes gets nervous without Dad, but we take care of her." And he smiled, that fake smile he had perfected for others. The smile of the perfect boy, the dedicated son who takes care of his widowed mother. Only I knew the monster behind that smile. When Mrs. Eberhardt left, Ernest grabbed me by the arm forcefully. "If you tell anyone anything, you'll regret it. No one will believe you anyway. They'll say you're crazy with grief over Dad's death." And he was right. Who would believe that children, some still so young, would be capable of such cruelty? Who would believe that a mother couldn't control her own children? They would be seen as poor orphans, and I as a weak, incapable woman, perhaps even crazy. Uncle Harold continued to visit regularly, always fueling the boys' behavior. He never assaulted me directly, but he made comments, gave suggestions to the boys when he thought I wasn't listening. "Don't let her get soft. A woman without a firm hand gets lost. It's for her own good." He said he was helping, that he was forming real men. He didn't realize, or didn't care, that he was creating little tyrants, teaching them that power meant cruelty, that masculinity was synonymous with contempt for women. The seasons passed. 1 year after William's death, then 2. The boys grew, became stronger, more inventive in their cruelties. I withered, languished, became a shadow of the woman I once was. There were moments when I thought about running away, taking Gerald, who was still small, and leaving in the middle of the night. But where would I go? Without money, without support, with a small child, in a time when a lone woman was viewed with suspicion? And how could I abandon my other children, even if they had become my tormentors? They were my children after all. Somewhere, under that cruelty, there were still the babies I had cradled in my arms. So I endured. Day after day, humiliation after humiliation. I lived for the small moments of peace, when everyone was asleep and I could cry silently, when Theodore managed to give me a hidden smile, when Gerald fell asleep in my lap, trusting me despite everything. There was also sewing. The boys didn't care about it. They considered it women's work beneath them. So they allowed me to sew at night after all the tasks were done. I mended clothes, made patchwork quilts, sometimes even created small cloth dolls that I hid so as not to irritate them. In sewing, I found a little peace, a little control. Each stitch was like a small affirmation. I'm still here. I'm still me. The winter of 1964 was particularly harsh. Snow covered the fields. The icy wind came through the cracks in the house. The boys assigned me to chop wood, a job too heavy for my hands already calloused and injured from 2 years of abuse. But I had no choice. If I didn't obey, the punishment would be worse. I was in the yard, struggling with the heavy axe, when I slipped on the ice and fell. I felt a sharp pain in my ankle. I tried to get up, but couldn't. I called for help, but no one came. I stayed there in the snow for almost an hour until Theodore, returning from the field, found me. "Mom!" He ran to me, genuinely concerned. "What happened?" "I fell," I managed to say through clenched teeth, the pain almost unbearable. "I think I hurt my ankle." He helped me into the house, supporting me on his shoulders, still small for his 9 years. When Ernest saw the scene, he showed no concern, only irritation. "Big deal. You're always wanting attention." "She's really hurt," Theodore defended. "We need to call the doctor." "Doctor?" Ernest laughed. "And who's going to pay? Besides, it's snowing. No one will come all the way here for a sprained ankle." They argued, but in the end, Ernest's decision prevailed, as always. I was left in my bed, with strict orders to be up and working the next morning. "If you can't work, you won't eat," was Ernest's final sentence. I spent the whole night awake, the pain pulsing in my swollen ankle, the fear of the next day gnawing at me. How would I work? How would I survive this test? Early in the morning, before the sun even rose, the door to my room opened. It was Theodore. He brought a cloth wet with cold water and some herbs that I recognized as arnica, good for bruises. "I brought this for your ankle," he whispered, looking nervously at the door. "And this too." From inside his pocket, he pulled out a piece of wood, the right size to serve as an improvised cane. "I found it in the shed. I sanded it so it wouldn't hurt your hand." Tears came to my eyes. This small gesture of kindness, after so much time of cruelty, was almost unbearable. "Thank you, my son," I whispered, holding his hand. "You have your father's heart." He smiled briefly, then became serious. "They're getting worse, Mom. Ernest said that when he turns 12, he's going to—" He stopped, unable to continue. He didn't need to. I had already heard the threats. Ernest openly talked about when he turned 12. He would be man enough to make definitive decisions about me. What that meant exactly, I didn't know. Nor did I want to know. That day, I managed to drag myself around the house using the improvised cane. I did what I could, ignoring the excruciating pain each time I put weight on my foot. At night, as always, came the judgment. It was George's day to command. He gathered everyone in the living room, as usual. The usual question was asked. "So, Mom, who was better today? Me or Ernest yesterday?" I was exhausted, in pain, at the limit of my strength. Something inside me broke. I couldn't continue the game. "Neither of you," I replied, looking not at George, but at the little ones, at Oliver and Gerald, who watched everything with wide eyes. "None of you are good. What you're doing is wrong. Your father would be ashamed." The silence that followed was absolute. For a moment I saw a flicker of doubt in the eyes of the younger ones, even Conrad's. But Ernest and George just exchanged a look. Without words, they grabbed me by the arms and dragged me out of the house. The night was freezing. Snow was falling softly. They took me to the barn and threw me in the hay. "Since you don't know how to recognize who's in charge here, you'll stay out here until you learn," said Ernest, his voice as cold as the wind cutting my face. And without this, George yanked the cane from my hand and broke it in two. To learn not to accept hidden help. They closed the barn door, leaving me in near total darkness. I heard the sound of the latch being placed. I was trapped. That was the longest night of my life. The cold penetrated to the bone, the pain in my ankle was unbearable, fear consumed me. Would I die there? Would my own children let me die of cold? At some point in the early morning, I heard a noise at the door. It was Theodore. He had managed to escape from the house and came to bring me a blanket. "I couldn't bring food," he whispered, tears freezing on his little face. "They're watching the kitchen." "It's okay," I replied, wrapping him in a quick hug. "You're already doing a lot, but be careful. If they find out—" "I know," he nodded, looking nervously at the house. "I have to go back before they notice." He left as silently as he had come, leaving me with the blanket and a little hope. Not all my children were lost. I spent 2 more days in the barn. Theodore managed to come for just a few minutes, bringing water and pieces of bread hidden in his pockets. On the 3rd day, the door opened, and there was Ernest. "Are you ready to behave now?" I just nodded, without strength to speak. He smiled, that cruel smile that had become his trademark. "Good. Today is Judgment Day. You're going to say in front of everyone who is the best man of the house. And if you try any tricks like last time, you'll come back here. And maybe we won't let Theodore bring blankets again." My heart froze. They knew. Theodore was in danger. I dragged myself back to the house without the cane, each step an agony. In the living room, everyone was gathered, even Uncle Harold, who had come to visit. "Well, sister-in-law," he said with a malicious smile, "I heard you're having trouble recognizing the boy's authority. That's not good. A woman needs to know her place." It was hell. There was no other description possible. I was in hell, surrounded by demons who had the face of my children. "So, Mom," Ernest stepped forward, "who is the best man of the house? Me, George, or maybe Uncle Harold?" I looked at each of them. At Ernest, with his almost 12 years and eyes full of cruelty. At George, always trying to outdo his brother in malice. At Harold, the adult who should protect, but who chose to poison. At Theodore, pale and frightened. At Conrad, confused and lost. At Oliver, learning the game of the older ones. At Gerald, who barely recognized me as a mother anymore. And at that moment, something died inside me. Hope, perhaps. Or maybe it was just fear. Because when you hit rock bottom, the only possible direction is up. You want to know who's the best? My voice came out hoarse but firm. None of you come close to the man your father was. He was good, kind, respectful. He would never have allowed this. Ernest's face contorted with rage. He advanced toward me, his hand raised. But something stopped him. It wasn't fear, nor hesitation. It was Uncle Harold's voice. "Leave it, Ernest. Your mother is confused. She'll learn. With time, she'll learn." And there was something in his tone, in the way he looked at me, that made me realize that the game had changed, that the real danger might no longer be my children, but the man who was molding them in his image. That night, I locked the door to my room and cried until I had no more tears. Not from despair, but from a cold, determined anger. They had taken almost everything from me. My dignity, my respect, my authority as a mother. But there was one thing they couldn't take: my will to survive, to find a way out of that nightmare. And it was there, on that dark winter night, that I began to plan. I didn't know how or when, but I swore to myself that I would find a way to save what was left of my family, to save my children from becoming complete monsters, to save myself. What I didn't know was that salvation would come from where I least expected. And that before that, I would have to face the most terrible moment of my life. The spring of 1965 arrived, bringing the thaw and the first flowers. I had completed 3 years of widowhood and nightmare. 3 years enduring daily humiliations, small and large cruelties, the slow dismantling of my dignity. My body showed the marks. I was thinner, with premature wrinkles, fingers permanently injured from excessive work. But it was the invisible marks that hurt the most. The constant fear, the deep sadness, the heart-wrenching longing for the children who were once my little loves. Ernest had turned 12 the previous month. As he had promised or threatened, he began to take even more control over the house and over me. It was no longer just 1 day a week. Now he considered himself the permanent commander, relegating George and the others to subordinate positions. The judgment continued, but now it was almost a formality, a ritual of humiliation they maintained out of habit. My only joy, my only breath, continued to be sewing. In the few hours I had left at night, I mended clothes, did small jobs for neighbors who sometimes brought me fabrics, and secretly saved the little money I earned. It wasn't much, but it represented a thread of independence, a possibility of a future that I dared not name, but kept alive like a small ember under the ashes. Theodore, now 10, continued to be my secret ally. He couldn't do much. If he was discovered helping me, he would pay a high price, but in small gestures, in looks of understanding, he gave me strength to continue. The other boys were at different stages of transformation. Conrad, at 9, oscillated between imitating the older ones and showing flashes of compassion. Oliver, at 7, had learned all too well the lessons of contempt. Gerald, at just 5, was increasingly distant from me, increasingly under the influence of his brothers. Uncle Harold now visited more frequently. With each visit, I noticed his glances lingering on me longer, in a way that caused me revulsion. His comments became more personal, more invasive. "You're still a beautiful woman, sister-in-law," he said once, when he found me alone in the kitchen. "Wasted here, taking care of these boys." I backed away, uncomfortable, but he just laughed. "You don't need to be afraid of me. Not yet." That "not yet" echoed in my head for days, increasing my anxiety, my sense of imminent danger. It was during one of Harold's visits that what I feared most happened. It was a Sunday afternoon, after lunch. The boys had gone fishing in the creek, except Ernest, who had stayed home to watch Mom, as he said. Harold had also stayed, sitting on the porch, drinking the peach brandy he himself brought. I was in the kitchen, washing dishes, when I heard the two talking. I couldn't make out the exact words, but the tone was conspiratorial, serious. Suddenly, the kitchen door opened, and there they were. "Uncle Harold has a proposal, Mom," said Ernest, with an expression that mixed malice and seriousness. "He thinks you need a real man in the house, not just to command, but for other things." I felt my blood freeze. Now I understood the looks, the comments. I understood the "not yet." "I am a respectable widow," I managed to say, my voice trembling. "I will not dishonor my husband's memory." Harold laughed, a deep laugh that gave me chills. "My brother has been dead for 3 years, sister-in-law. The mourning period is long over, and it's not as if I'm proposing marriage." He took a step forward. I took a step back, until I felt the sink at my back. I was cornered. "The boys need a man in the house, a real man, and you," he extended his hand and touched my face, "need to remember what it's like to be a woman." I pushed his touch away with a sudden movement. "Never. I'd rather die." I saw anger pass over his face like a shadow. For a moment I thought he would hit me. But then he controlled himself and smiled, that cold smile I already knew well. "You'll change your mind. Ernest, leave us alone." To my surprise and horror, Ernest obeyed without question. He left the kitchen, closing the door behind him. I had never felt so helpless, so vulnerable. "What do you think is going to happen here, Harold?" I asked, trying to buy time, looking around for something I could use to defend myself. "Nothing you won't end up enjoying," he replied, advancing. What happened next was so fast, I barely had time to think. When he tried to grab me, I reacted out of pure instinct. I grabbed the first thing I found, an iron skillet still hot from the stove, and hit him with all the strength I could gather. Harold staggered backwards, bringing his hand to his head where a cut was beginning to bleed. His face transformed into a mask of fury. "You bitch!" he growled, advancing again. This time, I had nowhere to run. He grabbed me by the arms with such force that it left purple marks. He shook me as if I were a rag doll. "You will learn. Today, you will learn who's in charge." The kitchen door suddenly opened. It was Theodore. He must have returned early from fishing, perhaps sensing something was wrong. "Mom!" he shouted, seeing the scene. Harold released me immediately, composing himself. "It's nothing, boy. Your mother and I were just talking." Theodore looked from me to Harold, from the blood on his forehead to the marks on my arms. His eyes narrowed with an understanding beyond his years. "I'm going to call Ernest," he said, turning around. "No!" I shouted, knowing what that would mean. Ernest wouldn't defend me. He was on Harold's side. "No need, son. Uncle Harold is just leaving." Harold wiped the blood from his forehead with his shirt sleeve, looking at me with barely contained hatred. "This isn't over," he said in a low voice, "just for me. You'll pay for this." He left the kitchen with wide strides. I heard the front door slam, then the sound of his horse galloping away. As soon as he left, my legs gave way. I slid to the floor, trembling uncontrollably. Theodore ran to me, hugging me with his thin little arms. "Mom, what happened? What did he do?" I couldn't answer immediately. The shock of what had almost happened, of what could have happened if Theodore hadn't arrived, left me speechless. I just hugged my son, holding him as if he were my last anchor in a world that was falling apart. Finally, I managed to compose myself enough to speak. "Nothing happened, my son. Thank God and you, nothing happened. But I knew it was just a matter of time. Harold would return, and next time he might not be lucky enough to be interrupted." That night, after everyone was asleep, I sat at the kitchen table with a piece of paper and a pencil. I needed a plan. I could no longer wait for fate or God to save me. I had to act. I thought about running away. Taking the little money I had saved from sewing, gathering some clothes and food, and leaving in the middle of the night with Gerald and perhaps Theodore. But where would I go? How would I survive with 2 children, without resources, without support? And how could I abandon the others, even knowing what they had become? I thought about reporting Harold and the abuses I suffered. But who would believe me? In our community, family problems were private matters. A mother who couldn't control her own children would be seen as incompetent, not as a victim. And Harold was respected, a man of means, of his word. His version would prevail over mine. I was trapped in a seemingly inescapable trap. And time was running out. In the days that followed, I lived in a constant state of alert. Ernest seemed strange, quieter, watching me with an expression I couldn't decipher. I was afraid that Harold had told him his version of what happened, painting me as the provocateur, as guilty. A week after the incident, my fear was confirmed. Ernest confronted me when we were alone in the barn. "Uncle Harold told me what happened," he said, looking at me with contempt. "He said you insinuated things, then got scared and attacked him." "That's a lie, Ernest," I replied, trying to stay calm. "Your uncle tried. He wanted—" I couldn't complete the sentence. How to explain to a 12-year-old boy, already poisoned by years of hatred, what had really happened? "He said it would be like this," Ernest continued, relentless. "He said you would make up stories, that all women do this when they regret." It was like talking to a wall. There was no way to make him see the truth. Harold had done a complete job transforming my children into extensions of his own wickedness. "He's coming back on Sunday," Ernest announced, turning to leave the barn. "And this time, you're going to treat him with the respect he deserves." Sunday arrived with the inevitability of a sentence. I woke up feeling sick with anxiety. What would I do? How would I escape this time? I spent the morning preparing lunch in a state of torpor, moving like a sleepwalker. The boys noticed my state, but interpreted it as fear, as submission. Only Theodore seemed truly concerned, giving me questioning looks that I didn't have the strength to answer. The sound of hooves on the road snapped me out of my stupor. Harold had arrived. This time he brought a gift, a bottle of sweet wine that he knew I appreciated. A poisoned gift, I knew. An attempt to soften me, to lower my guard. "For the lady of the house," he said, with false cordiality, handing the bottle to Ernest, who received it with a smile of complicity. During lunch, Harold acted as if nothing had happened. He told stories, laughed with the boys, made comments about the food. But his eyes, when they met mine, conveyed a clear message. Today, you won't escape. After the meal, when I began to collect the plates, he made his move. "Boys, why don't you go to the creek? I heard the trout are biting well today." It was an order disguised as a suggestion. The boys understood immediately. Ernest was the first to stand up. "Great idea, Uncle. Let's go, guys." One by one they began to leave. George, Conrad, Oliver, and even Gerald, dragged by George's hand. Only Theodore hesitated, looking at me with evident concern. "Go, Theodore," said Harold, with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Your mother and I have adult matters to discuss." Theodore didn't move. He remained seated, eyes fixed on me, asking for direction, a word that would authorize him to stay or go. "Theodore," Ernest's voice sounded from the door, impatient. "Let's go now." That's when I made my decision. A desperate, risky decision, but the only one that seemed possible to me at that moment. "Go, son," I said to Theodore, trying to convey with my eyes a message I couldn't say out loud. "But first, do me a favor. Stop by Mr. Miller's house and ask for some of that medicine for my headache. Tell him I really need it today." Mr. Miller was the town pharmacist, but I didn't have a headache and didn't need medicine. What I needed was for someone to know that I was alone with Harold, that I was in danger. It was a fragile plan, depended on Theodore understanding what I really wanted, on him having the courage to seek help, on someone believing him and acting in time. Theodore looked at me intensely for a second, then nodded. "Yes, Mom, I'll get the medicine for you." And he left, leaving me alone with Harold. As soon as the door closed, his smile transformed. "Finally alone," he said, getting up from the table and coming toward me. "Where did we leave off last time?" I backed up to the wall, desperately looking for something to defend myself with. But this time he was smarter. He grabbed my wrists with one hand, immobilizing me. "No pan hits today, sister-in-law," he laughed, his hot, sour breath on my face. "Today you're going to be nice." "Please, Harold." I tried one last appeal to his humanity, if there was any left. "Think of your brother. What would he say if he saw you like this?" It was the wrong thing to say. His face contorted with rage. "My brother is dead, dead, and you were his. Now it's my turn." He pulled me brutally, dragging me toward the bedroom. I fought with all my strength, scratching, kicking, biting. I managed to land a blow to his face that made him back off momentarily. I took advantage to run toward the door, but he was faster. He grabbed me by the hair and threw me to the floor with such force that I was left breathless. "I'll teach you to respect me, bitch," he growled, raising his hand to hit me. The blow never came. A sound at the front door stopped him. Someone was knocking insistently. "Mrs. Wilson?" a male voice called. "Are you home?" Harold froze, his hand still raised. I recognized the voice. It was Dr. Klein, the town doctor. My heart raced with relief and hope. Theodore had understood. He hadn't gone to the pharmacist, but directly to the doctor. "Mrs. Wilson?" the doctor called again, now with evident concern in his voice. "Your son Theodore said you're feeling unwell. May I come in?" Harold gave me a look of pure hatred. He placed his hand over my mouth, pressing hard. "Not a word," he hissed, "or you'll regret it." But I knew this was my only chance. I bit his hand with all the strength I could gather. He screamed in pain and surprise, loosening his grip enough for me to shout, "Help! Dr. Klein, help!" Everything happened very quickly after that. The door opened with a bang. Dr. Klein, a middle-aged but still strong man, came running in, followed by Theodore. He saw Harold over me, saw my state, the torn dress, the marked face, the terror in my eyes. No explanations were necessary. The doctor grabbed Harold by the collar and threw him away from me. "What's going on here?" he demanded, though it was quite obvious. Harold composed himself quickly, straightening his clothes, trying to regain his dignity. "It's not what it looks like, doctor," he said with a forced smile. "A small family misunderstanding, that's all." "Family?" the doctor repeated, looking from me to Harold with disbelief. "You're not her husband." "I'm the brother-in-law," Harold replied, as if that explained everything. "I'm helping take care of the boys since my brother passed away." Dr. Klein turned to me, who was now sitting on the floor, being supported by Theodore. "Mrs. Wilson, is this true? Is he helping?" It was the moment of truth, the moment to speak or be silent forever. I looked at Theodore, who nodded encouragingly, then at Harold, whose eyes promised revenge if I spoke. I took a deep breath and spoke. "No, doctor, he's not helping. He and my older sons have subjected me to humiliations and abuses since my husband's death. And today he tried. I couldn't complete it, but I didn't need to." The doctor's face hardened with understanding and anger. "I see," he said, turning to Harold. "I think it's best if you leave now, Mr. Wilson, and don't come back." Harold looked from me to the doctor, assessing his chances. Finally, he decided it was better to retreat, for now. "This isn't over," he said, addressing me. "You'll regret opening your mouth." "Leave!" the doctor ordered, taking a step forward, "or I'll call Sheriff Johnson right now." Harold hesitated a moment more, then left, slamming the door hard behind him. I heard the sound of his horse galloping away. Only then did I collapse, fear, relief, and shock flooding me all at once. I cried as I hadn't cried in years, big sobs that shook my entire body. Theodore hugged me, crying too. "Doctor." Klein knelt beside us, placing a comforting hand on my shoulder. "It's all right now," he said gently. "He's gone. You're safe." But I knew I wasn't. Harold would return. And when he did, he would come with Ernest and the others. He would be more furious than ever. What would happen then? As if reading my thoughts, the doctor spoke. "Mrs. Wilson, I don't think you can stay here anymore. Neither you nor young Theodore are safe." I looked at him, feeling a mixture of hope and despair. "But where can I go, doctor? I don't have close family. I don't have enough money." He thought for a moment, then said, "My sister lives in Manchester. She has a big house and lives alone since her husband passed away. I'm sure she would take you in until we can resolve the situation more permanently." Manchester, a larger city, a few hours' journey away, far from Harold, far from my children who had become my tormentors. The possibility of escape seemed both saving and devastating. "And the others?" I asked, thinking of Gerald, of Oliver, even of Conrad, who perhaps could still be saved. "I can't just abandon them." The doctor exchanged a look with Theodore, who spoke for the first time since entering the house. "They wouldn't come, Mom. They're on Uncle Harold's side, on Ernest's side." The pain of those words was almost physical. Knowing I had lost my children to hatred, to cruelty, was worse than any abuse I had suffered. "But maybe when they realize you're gone, when they understand what they were doing," Theodore continued, hopeful. I wanted to believe. I wanted to think that my departure would be a shock, an awakening for them. But deep down, I knew it was unlikely. "We need to act quickly," said Dr. Klein, standing up. "Harold may return at any moment, and the other boys too. Take only the essentials, Mrs. Wilson. My car is outside. I can take you to Manchester today." It was decision time. Stay and continue in the hell my house had become, or leave and abandon part of my children. There was no easy choice, no option without pain. I looked at Theodore, who watched me with pleading eyes. "Let's go, Mom," he whispered. "Please." It was his voice, his look, that decided for me. At least one of my children still loved me, still needed me. I couldn't fail him. "Yes," I finally answered. "Let's get out of here." I stood up with the help of Dr. Klein and Theodore. I went to my room and took only the essentials, some clothes, the hidden money from sewing, the few jewels I had inherited from my mother, a photo of William, my Bible. I hesitated when I saw my sewing basket. It was heavy, impractical for an escape, but I couldn't leave it. It was my anchor, my identity beyond wife and mother. I put it in the small bundle too. Theodore did the same, taking only some clothes and a small wooden horse that his father had carved for him. In minutes, we were ready. Before leaving, I stopped at the door and looked at the house where I had lived for so many years, where I had loved, suffered, raised my children, where a part of me would remain forever, along with the children I was leaving behind. "Goodbye," I whispered, not to the house, but to them, to Ernest, George, Conrad, Oliver, and little Gerald, my children whom hatred and cruelty had stolen from me. Theodore took my hand, squeezing it in support. Together we walked to Dr. Klein's car. That's when we heard it. The sound of horses approaching. Many horses. "Quick!" The doctor rushed us, opening the car door. "They're coming back!" Theodore and I got into the vehicle. The engine roared, and we began to move away. In the rearview mirror, I saw Harold arriving at the house, followed by Ernest and the others. They saw the car moving away and immediately understood what was happening. Harold shouted something, pointing at us. Ernest took his horse and began to follow us. "Faster, doctor!" I begged, seeing my oldest son chasing us, his face contorted with hatred even at a distance. Dr. Klein accelerated as much as he could on the dirt road. For some agonizing minutes, Ernest managed to stay close. But gradually, the car gained advantage. The last image I had of him was his fist raised in defiance or threat, before he disappeared in the dust of the road. Only then did I allow myself to breathe again. Beside me, Theodore sobbed silently. I put my arm around him, pulling him close. "Everything will be all right, my son," I whispered, though I wasn't sure if I believed that. "We'll start over, just the two of us." As the car continued down the road toward Manchester, toward an uncertain but possibility-filled future, I thought of the children I had left behind. I prayed that one day they might understand, that one day hatred would give way to love again, that one day we would be a family again. But at that moment, all I could do was move forward, save what could be saved, and trust that the true judge, not my children in their cruel game, but God in his infinite wisdom, would guide our steps from there. We arrived in Manchester in the early evening. The city, even not being large by today's standards, seemed enormous to me, who had spent the last few years confined to an isolated farm. The lights of houses and businesses, the movement in the streets, the sounds of people talking and laughing, all of that seemed from another world. Dr. Klein took us directly to his sister's house, Mrs. Matilda Weber. It was a beautiful house in the highest part of the city, with a well-kept garden and lace curtains at the windows. Matilda was a middle-aged widow without children who ran a small fabric shop in the center of town. When we arrived, she was already waiting for us on the porch, notified by a phone call the doctor had made before we left Middleton. "Welcome, Mrs. Wilson," she said as she received me, her voice gentle but firm. "And you too, young Theodore. My house is modest, but it has enough space for you." That first night I could hardly sleep, despite the soft bed and clean sheets. I kept expecting to hear Ernest's footsteps in the hallway, George's orders, Gerald's crying. The silence in Matilda's house was both a relief and a torture. Liberation and loss, inextricably intertwined. Theodore adapted more quickly. The morning after we arrived, Matilda took him to visit the local school. In a few days, he was already enrolled and attending classes. Seeing his enthusiasm when returning home with new knowledge, new friends, was like a balm for my wounded heart. For the first time in years, I saw my son smile without fear, speak without hesitation, be a real child. As for me, I needed more time. The first days in Matilda's house were a physical and emotional recovery. I slept a lot, ate little, spoke even less. I spent hours looking out the window, thinking of the children I had left behind, imagining what they were doing, what Harold would be telling them about my departure, if they missed me or if they celebrated my absence. Matilda respected my silence and my pain. She didn't ask questions, didn't demand explanations. She was simply there, a calm and comforting presence. Sometimes she would leave a cup of tea by my side, or a piece of cake. Small gestures of kindness that after years of cruelty seemed almost surreal. It was Theodore who finally pulled me out of my torpor. About 2 weeks after our arrival, he entered the room where I was sitting, looking out the window as usual. "Mom," he said, his childish voice carrying a precocious maturity, "you can't stay like this forever. The others, they're not worth your suffering." His words hit me like a shock. It was true. I was destroying myself over those who had chosen to destroy me. Meanwhile, the son who had remained loyal, who had risked everything to save me, was being neglected in his need for a present, strong mother. "You're right, my son," I replied, hugging him. "It's time to start over." The next day, I got up determined to regain control of my life. The first thing I did was offer help to Matilda with household chores. She accepted with a smile, and together we cleaned the house, prepared lunch, washed clothes. It was strange to do these everyday tasks without the weight of fear, without expecting criticism or punishment at every move. It was liberating. Then, I took my sewing basket out of the closet where I had stored it. When Matilda saw my work, she was impressed. "You have talent, Eleanor," she said, examining an embroidery I had made. "Why don't you come work with me at the store? We could offer personalized sewing services. I have many customers who would be happy to pay for work like this." That's how I began my new professional life. Every morning, after preparing Theodore for school, I went with Matilda to the fabric store. At first, I just helped serve customers and organize products. But soon, word about my sewing talents spread, and I began to receive orders. Dresses for special occasions, baby layettes, delicate embroidery, anything involving needle and thread became art in my hands. The work was not just a source of income, but of healing. Each stitch was as if I were sewing back the torn pieces of my soul. Each completed piece gave me a sense of accomplishment, of self-worth that had been systematically destroyed during years of abuse. The months passed, and with them, I gradually transformed. The shrinking, fearful woman who had arrived in Manchester gave way to someone more confident, stronger. I still carried scars, of course. I still occasionally woke up in the middle of the night, in panic, thinking I had heard Ernest's or Harold's voice. I still cried when I thought of Gerald, my little one who was now growing up without me. But these wounds, though they would never completely disappear, began to heal. Theodore also flourished. At school, he proved to be a brilliant student, especially in mathematics and sciences. He made friends, participated in activities, lived the normal childhood that had been denied him on the farm. At night, when we sat down to dine with Matilda, he spoke animatedly about his day, his projects, his dreams, and I silently thanked God for having saved at least one of my children. Our relationship with Matilda also evolved from hostess and guests to a true friendship, almost familial. She, who had never had children, found in Theodore the nephew she never had, and in me, perhaps, the sister she had always wanted. We spent Sundays together, sometimes having a picnic by the river, other times just talking on the porch while we had coffee. We were an unconventional family, united not by blood, but by kindness and mutual respect. It was Matilda who encouraged me to seek legal help to formalize my situation. 6 months after our arrival in Manchester, she introduced me to Dr. Heinrich, a respected lawyer in the city. With his help, I began the process to obtain official custody of Theodore and to protect my rights over the farm in Middleton, which, after all, was half mine by inheritance right. "It won't be easy," Dr. Heinrich warned me. "Mr. Wilson will probably contest it. And there's also the matter of the other boys." The matter of the other boys, as if they were a legal problem to be solved and not pieces of my heart left behind. But I understood what he meant. Legally, I was still the mother of 6 children, not just Theodore, and the law favored keeping the family together, regardless of the circumstances. "What do you suggest I do, Doctor?" I asked, feeling the weight of the decision that was to come. "We have 2 options," he explained. "We can fight for custody of all your children, which would mean they would have to come live with you here in Manchester. Or we can seek only Theodore's custody, leaving the others under the responsibility of a relative, your brother-in-law, perhaps, or another family member." The idea of having all my children back, of reuniting the family, was tempting, but also terrifying. Ernest and George were already so poisoned by hatred. Forcing them to live with me could be a disaster for everyone. And Theodore, who was finally safe and happy, would have to face fear and violence again. "I need to think," I replied to the lawyer. "It's a very difficult decision." I spent weeks agonizing over what to do. I talked with Matilda, who patiently listened to my dilemmas without judging. I talked with Theodore, who made clear his fear of having the older brothers nearby again. I talked to myself, trying to separate the mother's love from the fear of the woman who had been abused. Finally, I made my decision. I returned to Dr. Heinrich's office with a heavy but resolute heart. "I will seek only Theodore's custody," I announced. The others will stay with their uncle, if that is their wish." The lawyer nodded, understanding. "It's a wise decision, considering the circumstances. But you should be prepared for the accusations that will come. Your brother-in-law will probably allege abandonment, neglect." "I'm prepared," I replied, though I wasn't sure if I really was. "I'll do whatever is necessary to protect Theodore and myself." The legal process was long and painful, as Dr. Heinrich had predicted. Harold hired a lawyer from Boston and vigorously contested my custody request. As expected, he accused me of being a negligent mother, of having abandoned the home and 5 of my children. He went so far as to suggest that I had mental problems due to grief over William's death. What he didn't expect was that I was no longer alone. Dr. Klein testified in my favor, describing the state in which he found me that fateful Sunday, the physical marks of abuse, the evident terror in my eyes. Matilda testified about my recovery, my dedication to Theodore, my honest work at the store. And Theodore himself, with a courage that left me moved and proud, told the judge about the years of psychological torture, the cruel game of judgments, the daily humiliations. Ernest and George were also called to testify. It was the first time I had seen them since our escape, more than a year before. They were taller, stronger, more like men than the boys I had left, but their eyes still carried that hardness, that hatred that had haunted me for years. Their testimonies were like stabs in my heart. They repeated Harold's lies, described me as a cold and distant mother, claimed that I mistreated them, that I ran away because I couldn't handle the responsibility of raising 6 children. When the judge asked if they would like to live with me again, both responded with an emphatic no. Conrad, Oliver, and Gerald were not called to testify due to their age, but I could see them briefly in the courthouse corridors. Conrad, now 10, looked at me with a mixture of confusion and resentment. Oliver, at 8, seemed not to recognize me completely. And Gerald, my little 6-year-old, hid behind Harold's legs, his little eyes wide with fear at seeing the stranger who was his mother. Those encounters were perhaps the hardest part of the whole process. Seeing what I had lost, what I would never recover, was an almost physical pain. But it also reinforced my determination. I couldn't bring those boys into the new life I had built. I couldn't heal what was so deeply broken. The best I could do was ensure a safe future for Theodore and for myself. The trial lasted more than a week. They were days of painful revelations, of tears shed, of truths finally exposed to the light. On the last day, the judge asked to speak with me and Harold in private, without the lawyers. "I've heard many disturbing things in this room," he said, looking severely at Harold. "Things that, under normal circumstances, could lead to a criminal investigation. But I also understand that there are children involved, children who have already suffered enough trauma." He turned to me, his gaze softening slightly. "Mrs. Wilson, you have shown great courage in seeking help and rebuilding your life. But you also made a difficult choice in leaving 5 of your children behind, a choice that, regardless of the circumstances, you will carry forever." I nodded, feeling the weight of that truth. It was a guilt that would never completely leave me, no matter how many times I was told I did what was necessary. "Considering everything I've heard and seen," the judge continued, "I am inclined to grant you exclusive custody of Theodore. As for the other boys, they will officially remain under Mr. Wilson's guardianship, who seems to have been their father figure in recent years." Harold smiled, triumphant, but the smile disappeared with the judge's next words. "However," he emphasized, "this comes with conditions. Mr. Wilson will allow supervised visits between Mrs. Wilson and her younger children, Conrad, Oliver, and Gerald, should she wish and they be willing. And as for the property in Middleton, it will be divided. The house and half the land will remain with the boys for their support. The other half will be sold, and the proceeds deposited in an account in Mrs. Wilson's name." It wasn't a complete victory, but it was more than I had hoped for. I would have Theodore, I would have resources to rebuild our life, and I would have the possibility, however remote, of one day reconnecting with my younger children. Harold, on the other hand, seemed furious. The prospect of losing half the property that he had practically considered his since William's death clearly displeased him. But he didn't dare contest the judge directly. "As you wish, Your Honor," he said through clenched teeth. 3 days later, I officially received custody of Theodore and the documents guaranteeing my share of the property. It was the end of a painful chapter and the formal beginning of our new life. The first thing I did with the money from the sale of the land was to buy a small house on the outskirts of Manchester. It was modest, but ours, a place where no one could evict us, where no one would judge or humiliate us, a place to heal, to grow, to start over. I continued working at Matilda's store, which over time became our partner instead of just employer. We expanded the business, adding an exclusive section for handicrafts, my sewing, embroidery, and quilts that became known throughout the region. Wilson Artisan Crafts, we called it, and I felt immense pride seeing my name associated with something beautiful, something valued. Theodore, as I promised myself, had all the opportunities I could provide. He continued his studies with excellence, participated in math competitions, took music classes, something he always wanted but never could on the farm. At 16, he was accepted to study engineering in Boston with a merit scholarship. It was hard to see him leave, but it was also an indescribable joy to see him fulfilling his dreams. As for my other children, the supervised visits never happened as the judge had ordered. Harold found ways to avoid them. The boys were sick, or busy with school, or simply didn't want to see the mother who abandoned them. With time, I stopped insisting. The pain of being repeatedly rejected was too much, but I maintained indirect contact. I sent gifts on birthdays, letters on special dates. I asked for news through mutual acquaintances. I learned that Ernest and George, as soon as they reached adulthood, left Middleton to try life in Boston. Conrad took over the farm, married young, and started his own family. Oliver went into the army. And Gerald, my little one, followed Theodore's footsteps and went to study, becoming a teacher. Sometimes, in the years that followed, I caught myself imagining how it would have been if things were different. If William hadn't died so early, if Harold hadn't poisoned my children's minds, if I had found the strength to resist sooner. But I learned that there's no benefit in getting lost in what-ifs. What matters is what we do with what we have, with what remained after the storm. And what remained for me was precious. A saved son, a rebuilt life, a recovered dignity, an inner strength that I never knew I possessed until it was tested beyond limits, and the certainty that, no matter how dark the night, there's always a dawn waiting. It was this certainty that allowed me, years later, to do what many would consider impossible: forgive. Not forget, I could never forget, but forgive. Not for them, but for me. To finally release the chains of the past that still bound me, to heal completely. And so, with time, the pain transformed into wisdom, fear into strength, tragedy into rebirth. And I, Eleanor Wilson, the woman who was once both judge and victim in her own particular hell, finally became the judge only of my own life. And in that judgment, I found not condemnation, but absolution, not punishment, but liberation. Those who see me today, at 82, teaching sewing to the women here in Millbrook, might not imagine the life I've had. Time has passed, my hair has whitened, my hands have gained wrinkles and spots, but my fingers are still agile with needle and thread. It's funny how some skills are engraved in us as if they were part of our soul. I came to this little town in rural Pennsylvania almost 20 years ago. It was after Theodore married Rachel, a Pennsylvania girl he met in college. They settled in Philadelphia, where he opened his own engineering firm. When I retired from the store in Manchester, Theodore insisted that I come closer to him. "Mom, you've lived away from family long enough," he said. I agreed, but chose Millbrook instead of the big city. I like the tranquility of rural areas, the slower pace, the people who know each other by name. My house here is small but cozy, with a yard where I grow some flowers and herbs. I have a special room for my sewing classes, with vintage machines that I prefer to modern ones, and shelves full of colorful fabrics, threads of all kinds, buttons and laces. 3 times a week, I receive my students, women of all ages who come to learn not only to sew, but also to transform pieces of cloth into stories, into memories. Theodore comes to visit me every month, bringing my 2 grandchildren, William and Laura. William is 15 and already shows the same talent as his father for numbers and construction. Laura, at 12, inherited my taste for sewing. She spends hours by my side learning new stitches, creating small works of art with fabric scraps. When I see them, I feel that, despite everything, life has been generous to me. I managed to save not just one son, but an entire lineage of love and kindness. As for my other children, time brought some surprises. Conrad, who took over the farm in Middleton, sought me out about 10 years ago. He came alone to Manchester, was already a grown man with his own children. "I wanted to understand," he said. We talked for hours, cried together. It wasn't a perfect reunion. There were many wounds, many different versions of the same story, but it was a beginning. Today we exchange occasional letters, call on special dates. It's a cautious, imperfect reconciliation, but precious. Gerald also re-established contact when he became a teacher. He sent me a letter saying that, while working with children, he began to question his own childhood, the stories he heard about me. We met once in Boston. It was a tense lunch, full of uncomfortable silences, but when we said goodbye, he hugged me, a quick, almost embarrassed hug, but one that meant the world to me. I never saw Ernest and George again. I learned from Conrad that both had difficult lives, marked by conflicts and failed relationships. Ernest died 5 years ago, from a heart attack. I couldn't go to the funeral, I wouldn't be welcome. But I lit a candle, prayed for his soul. After all, however cruel he had been, he was my son, a part of me. George, from what I know, still lives in Boston, alone. Sometimes I think about trying to make contact, but the fear of rejection is still strong. Oliver is the only one I have no news of. After the army, he disappeared. No one in the family knows his whereabouts. In my nightly prayers, I always include a special request for him wherever he may be. As for Uncle Harold, I learned he died many years ago, bitter and lonely. I felt no joy at the news, nor vengeance. Just a certain relief, like someone who finally puts a period at the end of a sad story. Today, when I look back at the path I've traveled, I see that each piece of my life, the good and the terrible, formed the woman I am today. Like a patchwork quilt, where each square tells a different story, but together they form something complete, something beautiful in its own way. People here in Millbrook know me as the sewing grandma, the nice lady who teaches the girls to embroider and makes the most beautiful dresses for the town's festivities. They don't know about the woman who was once judged by her own children, who fled one spring night to save what remained of her dignity and her family. And that's okay. Some stories are to be told, others to be kept in the heart. What makes me happiest today is the peace I've found. It's not a perfect peace. There are still nights when I wake up frightened. There are still moments when guilt and longing squeeze my heart. But it's a true peace. The peace of someone who survived the storm and learned to value every ray of sunshine after it. My dear ones who have stayed with me until now, thank you for listening to my story. It wasn't easy to tell it, but I felt I needed to. Because maybe, somewhere, someone is going through something similar. Someone who feels judged, diminished, imprisoned by those who should protect and love. To that person, I want to say, you are not alone. And more importantly, there is a way out. It may seem impossible now when the walls of suffering seem so high and impassable. But believe me, there's always a crack of light, a possibility of starting over. If you enjoyed my life story, subscribe to this channel, like the video, and comment where you're watching from with the word salvation. Thank you to all who watched until here. I love you.